Joining us to discuss all of this, Tristan Leavitt is here, president of Empower Oversight, and a counsel to IRS whistleblower Gary Shapley. Tristan, good to have you back on the show, sir.
Thanks. Always good to be with you, Vince.
Okay, so Hunter Biden was actually the victim of political persecution. What do you make of that?
This is the same selective, it's not even selective truth. It's just the same lies that we've heard for quite some time from, folks in the Biden orbit, and now they're being repeated by the president. But it's clear from all of the facts and circumstances since the IRS whistleblowers came forward that what they had to say has been vindicated. If this was just a selective targeting, Hunter Biden never would have pled guilty to all these charges if there were not a very thorough and meticulous case that would have come out in the trial that was going to go forward. So there's also other misstatements in President Biden's statement, assuming that he has the benefit of the doubt there. But he claims that these were charges from while Hunter Biden was still in the throes of his addiction, when his own book makes clear that he had already ended his addiction by the time he filed these false tax statements. So this is really just a really sad way for the Biden presidency to end, but really not a surprise, unfortunately.
No, not at all. Okay, so I want to just remind people of what the IRS whistleblowers, to include your client, Gary Shapley, revealed. They came out and expressed that there was a real privileged arrangement going on with all of the tax questions involving the Biden family, and that they were receiving constant pressure to not further investigate the things that they detected that were suspicious, including that Joe Biden himself was involved in, right?
Yeah, so the kind of two big buckets were, first, like you say, not being allowed to look at anything that touched on Joe Biden, so they couldn't ask in interviews about him being the big guy. They couldn't get subpoenas related to Joe Biden or anything else, even when there was a clear nexus from the records of Hunter Biden they were looking at. Then the second piece of it was, even after they finally got to a place where DOJ agreed with the charges that were going to be brought against Hunter Biden, and Merrick Garland was saying there would be no political interference, when David Weiss brought those charges to other districts, the U.S. attorneys in California and in D.C. both said, well, we're not going to let you bring that here. And David Weiss didn't have independent authority to bring it on its own. So the cases were effectively dead before the IRS whistleblowers came forward saying political interference is exactly why this case will die with no charges. And only after they came forward did DOJ suddenly scramble to try and cover the whole thing up with a plea deal, which, of course, Judge Noriega in Delaware fortunately looked closely enough at to see that it was a sham.
I also remember it wasn't too long ago that we found out that the CIA apparently had also intervened in the IRS investigation to block the whistleblowers from digging into somebody called Kevin Morris. He's the guy who's been paying all of Hunter Biden's legal bills. And your client started looking into this and was blocked by the CIA. What do we know about that?
Well, not a ton, but what we do know is that the prosecutor on the case, Leslie Wolf from Delaware, was summoned to the CIA. She made a big show to all of the investigators on the case saying, oh, I've been asked to go down there. When she came back, she said, look at this swag that I got. But she basically just told them, well, for reasons I can't disclose to any of you because they're classified, we're not going to be looking any closer. We're not going to be looking any further at Kevin Morris. And so that was the end of their examining him, who otherwise, he played a significant role in a potential campaign finance case because of his donations, which seemed to the investigators, as the Ways and Means Committee released last year, to really be aimed just at protecting Joe Biden and his reelection by paying off Hunter Biden's tax bills for the purposes of influencing those so they wouldn't be an issue in the election.
Because Kevin Morris meets Hunter Biden at a donor event during Joe Biden's campaign in the 2020 election. And he realizes this is a guy who's deeply in debt. He's going to be a big liability for the campaign. And he comes in as a sort of a savior. He starts spending all of his own money, and they classify it as loans. It's no wonder the IRS would be suspicious.
Yes, and he started making those payments only 2 months after he first met Hunter Biden. So immediately after he's connected, that's when he, there are emails out there that have been released by the Ways and Means Committee where he says, well, this is our task. They make these statements that make it sound like it's nothing other than just political business for them to make sure that Hunter Biden's taxes were paid off and that they didn't come out during the primary season in 2020.
So don't you find it deeply suspicious that the CIA would get involved at all in this investigation?
Well, I mean, it's certainly surprising, but so are so many other elements of this case, right? I think we've discussed before, right, that either that suggests that Morris was somehow some sort of a source for the CIA, or perhaps less plausibly, but also possible, that they had some sort of derogatory information on him, and they, for whatever reason, wanted to continue to pursue that without him being a part of this DOJ case. But again, we will likely never know the truth. There's some Congress has requested some information on that and briefing on that, but if it remains classified, that's not something we're ever going to get at. But it is certainly one of the many wild things in the wild saga involving Hunter Biden.
Yeah, I just can't help but notice the number of times the CIA has popped up in the Hunter Biden story. That just seems strange. I mean, everything from the 51 intelligence officials, former intelligence officials. We now know it was organized in part by active CIA officials who were able to get all the signatures on that letter to support the Biden family in the 2020 election. And then, the CIA was blocking investigations into the man who was giving the Biden family money to make all of their legal problems go away. It stinks to high heaven is what I'm trying to say to you.
It's bad. There's no question. And those, to the involvement of the CIA, the active officers is crazy and is a big problem. You can see that, obviously the information's out there about Anthony Blinken trying to organize that to get them doing that. And his emails are in the Hunter Biden laptop, right? Like, he has significant personal exposure should that information come out. So he had every reason to try and mobilize the CIA to stop this information from coming out, to discredit it. But why the CIA was so willing to go along, I don't know. But you're right, it does stink to high heaven.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right, so on the tax charges that were finally leveled against Hunter Biden, I'm really struck by the dates here. 2014 is where the pardon covers from 2014, the beginning of 2014, all the way up until yesterday. Joe Biden issues a blanket pardon for any crimes that Hunter may have committed during that time. And Hunter was convicted on these tax charges in Los Angeles, and they only date back to 2016. So why would he need to go all the way back to 2014? And I'm going to remind people that's the year that Hunter joined the board at Burisma. Do you have any theories on that, Tristan?
Yeah, so you may recall that one of the whistleblower allegations was that the 2014 and 2015 tax years, for which there was also a strong case, the statute of limitations was allowed to expire on those years. That would have been in the District of Columbia. All these other ones were brought in California, but those were the two DC years they expired. I think the two, one strongest likelihood and then another possibility as well. The strongest thing is if the FBI or others were still looking at possible Foreign Agents Registration Act charges, any of that event could date back to 2014. That normally only has a 5-year statute of limitations. And of course, again, the statute of limitations for the taxes is already expired. But for any of this, if there is a conspiracy, the most recent act and furtherance of the conspiracy extends the statute of limitations. So if a future prosecutor were to come in and to decide to, zealously look at that, there could have been potential legal liability for Hunter Biden, because there's clear questions, not only from the Ukrainian activity with Burisma, but also from the efforts involving Chinese companies in 2018. So, I think that's the clear answer as it relates to Hunter Biden. As it relates to Joe Biden, you really have to wonder, because that's the time when the Biden family was so active, right? This is the period in which Joe Biden went over and told them that they needed to fire Victor Shokin. So, it's difficult not to view this through a lens that feels like Joe Biden is doing some covering for himself here as well.
Yes. In fact, the House Oversight Committee has an excellent timeline for everyone on the Biden family's influence peddling operation. And it gives you through the years all of the time and money that we are aware of that they made and at what point that occurred. 2014, as I mentioned, that's the year Hunter Biden joined the board of Burisma. And it was in that same time frame that the Biden family and its associates made at least $10 million from both Ukraine and Russia back during that time frame, which is interesting because that was when Joe Biden was vice president of the United States. That's when he was pressuring the Ukrainians to fire Victor Shokin, who was investigating Burisma, the company on whose board Hunter Biden sat. And that brings us to today, where we have this very dramatic conflict going on between Ukraine and Russia. And Joe Biden just immunized any sort of investigation into his family's involvement, it appears.
Yeah, that's right. But don't worry, he's also forgiven all the money to Ukraine that has been loaned there by the United States, but announces today that they want to give him another $800 million. So I'm sure there's nothing wrong that will happen with any of that money given the Biden family history over there.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, finally, what more can be done here? Has Joe Biden closed down the routes of investigation by virtue of this pardon that would give us more answers?
That's somewhat unclear. Certainly, the prosecution is going to. There's a little bit of a legal down in the weeds back and forth right now because the special counsel Weiss's office is saying it doesn't automatically. You don't dismiss the indictment; it stays on the record. But in terms of the investigative activity, it's unclear whether any future investigators would be able to look at that, given that there's no possibility of prosecution. But even if it is not done for the purposes of prosecuting. So I guess what I'm saying is it's unclear if the future special counsel could investigate it just for the purpose of investigating. But Congress does that sort of thing all the time, and especially now that Hunter Biden no longer can claim legal threat or legal liability, then he can no longer invoke the Fifth Amendment. So Congress certainly could dig in further on this. And there are also, aside from Hunter Biden, there are a lot of questions that need to be answered about David Weiss's office, going back to what we talked about earlier with them pulling punches and refusing to allow a fulsome investigation. So there still has to be a number of these things looked at, whether it's Congress that does it, whether it's the Justice Department Inspector General now that this case is no longer open, or whether there's some sort of independent entity appointed. These are all areas that require answers. And one other area to keep in mind is that Hunter Biden is still suing the IRS. He has not dropped his lawsuit claiming that our clients, Gary Shapley and Joe Ziegler, have violated taxpayer protection laws.
Oh.
And that's why they are also still suing Abby Lowell, Hunter Biden's attorney, for defamation. So defendwhistleblowers.com has more about that lawsuit, but that is still very much an ongoing thing. Hunter's now in the clear, but he has not stopped his targeting of the IRS whistleblowers.
So these twin lawsuits going back and forth between the IRS whistleblowers and Hunter Biden, is that the kind of thing that could lead to discovery that reveals some more interesting details for the rest of us?
Yes, it absolutely could.
Okay.
So we'll see what happens. Abby Lowell filed his, Hunter Biden's attorney, Abby Lowell, filed his response just a couple of weeks ago. It was as defiant as ever. It's clear that he is still spoiling for a fight. And so we'll see what happens in the course of this because, we are happy to review, the background of these guys coming to Congress is a very straightforward one.
Yes.
All of the interactions of Abby Lowell behind the scenes are clearly much less straightforward, including a letter that was reported just recently by the Washington Post, apparently a 52-page letter that seems to have been aimed at the president. And once again, we have an instance where Hunter Biden and his attorneys are making arguments to the government that the rest of the public has no insight into. So that letter really needs to come out as well.
Yeah, the IRS whistleblowers are not the guys who have secrets to keep. All their cards are on the table. They just want to tell the truth. Tristan Leavitt, thank you very much. Good to have you with us today.